Hello, friends, and welcome to the April 19th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And I want to start today with a couple of quick announcements. First, we are still taking signatures on our Texas Faith for Fair Election statement. You can find that at everyvotetx.org. Please make sure that you and your networks have signed and send a clear statement that Texans of faith reject voter suppression. Second, I want to encourage you to make sure that you're following Texas Impact social media pages, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And I especially want to highlight our YouTube channel and Ledge TV. If not, you might have missed, among other things, our video clip of Representative Joe Moody from El Paso last week during the debate to allow unlicensed carry of firearms in Texas. Representative Moody made an impassioned statement through the lens of the tragedy in his home community of El Paso and questioned the legislature's historic inaction. It was a must-watch, so make sure you're subscribed to make sure that you see that content and others like it. So on to today. Today we're going to be focusing on renewable energy with Jeff Clark. Then we'll welcome Reverend Danielle Ayers and our friends from Friendship West for a special segment entitled Bringing It Home, before closing it out with Josh Houston for a legislative update and action alert for the first part of this week, and we'll talk more about that later in the episode. If you want to go ahead and pull up that action alert now, you can find it at texasimpact.org in the Action Center. But before all of that, I am honored to welcome to the conversation someone who I've been seeing quite a bit of over the course of the last few weeks, some online and once even in person. So many of you have seen Rabbi Neil Blumoff either on this program or at Texas Impact's recent voting rights press conference or other places. But we're excited to welcome to the conversation Rabbi Neil Blumoff of Congregation Agudas Hakim in Austin. Rabbi Blumoff, I've really enjoyed seeing you so many times over the course of the last few weeks, and it was really great to see you in person. But thanks for joining us today, and the floor is now yours for this week's Weekly Word.
You too, Scott. Thank you so much. And it's a privilege to speak. And thank you, Texas Impact, for your great work. You know, it's only been 2 months since our beloved state of Texas was cold and snowed in. And like so many, my home lost power, and we were displaced for several days. We all saw our disadvantages plainly when our power grid broke down. In response, we need to make essential infrastructure spending and regulation a priority of this legislative session, so our mistakes and our failings are not repeated. We celebrate the blessings of Texas. Our state is the largest producer of electricity from wind power in the United States, and we are also the largest producer of oil and gas in this country. Much like the children of Israel, we have the blessing of double manna in the wilderness, each day receiving enough for all of us. We have much to choose from and many resources to manage as we provide for the residents of our great state and bolster our economy also by increasing our export markets. In short, we have in Texas abundance. We read in Leviticus of a goat that was released into the wilderness by the people to ameliorate their guilt. This was the original scapegoat, and this goat never returned on its journey. We are to recognize that this goat is a symbol for both our shortcomings and our investments, our flops and our dreams, as we make our way in this world. How do we manage our resources responsibly? How do we see that this world is shifting as our climate intensifies? Our land bears the weight of our choices made from generation to generation. And this goat from the Bible was to alleviate our burdens. It was released to make us feel better. However, we can no longer keep track of this goat. This goat does not make us whole. We cannot scapegoat when we are responsible. We realize in our day that we must work together to keep each other safe. warm in winter and cool in summer. We must adjust to our changing world and recognize, too, that our weather is getting more furious more often. We must be strategic with the good fortune of our state and not just reward those who have ownership claims to nature. Now is the time for our thinking beyond routine. We can harness creativity and make sure that the natural resources of Texas benefit those living in our state. This means that we shouldn't have to worry about a grid that is unstable or that we will be without the energy that we need in the most critical time when we need it. How we respond to each other in times of crisis is our definition of whether or not we are in community together. Do we truly care for our neighbors? For example, can we prioritize free wireless internet across our Lone Star State for everyone? Can there not be positive incentives created that increase consumer side efficiency and conservation? Our Psalms state, "The earth is the Lord's and its fullness, the inhabited land and those who dwell in it." We are, all of us, just passing through. We are to develop a sense of well-being that goes beyond our own sense of being. We are to connect to our ancestors and those who have lived in this state, as well as the generations that will come after us, holding the legacy that we choose to give them today. Our faith traditions are to give us depth and perspective, that we are living in the eyesight of God, not in our own personal clamor and claims of the moment. Our life is precious, timeless, and it exists past the arc of our consumption. We are on this earth to take care of each other, to be good stewards of our state as if we were tending the Garden of Eden itself. Let us not be speculative. Let us be driven to provide for each of us and all of us with the riches that we possess. Let us be smart and avoid another exile into the harshest wilderness. Let us define the costs of environmental change in Texas, and then let us plan for these costs as we strive to not be haughty, but holy. In all kinds of weather, we are to take care of each other. This is how we respond with grace. We share what we have, not only for our own survival, but in ably and conscientiously magnifying the name of Texas, which is blessed with so much. We can still lead, and we must lead with courage and vision in our nation in our world on behalf of all of us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. I have to say, I'm glad I was not on video when you said not haughty, but holy, because I laughed and might have spit out some of my tea. So thankful for technology hiding us. I really appreciate your time today. And then thanks for that reflection. Perfect way to start our week. So thank you again. All right, next I would like to welcome to the conversation Jeff Clark, the President and CEO of Advanced Power Alliance. The Advanced Power Alliance is an industry trade association created to promote the development of wind, solar, and energy storage as resources that can deliver clean, reliable, affordable power for American consumers. Jeff, this is, I think, your second time on Weekly Witness. It's been a little while, though. Thanks for joining us.
It is, yeah. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the Rabbi for the inspiration. And I think the message, there was a moment there, or a phrase that he used that I think is really key to understanding energy in Texas. And it was when he said that we have double manna, that we really have, unlike almost any other state in the country, we've been so richly blessed with energy resources. And the key, as he said, is to use those wisely for the good of the entire state. And so I appreciate the inspiration, and I appreciate the invitation to join you.
Thanks. So this really is a place where Texas can and should be a leader, right? And so
absolutely.
Start us out by just walking us through where we are in the legislative session in terms of renewable policy and what listeners should be paying attention to at this point in session.
Of course, well, everyone knows our legislative sessions occur every 2 years. for 140 days. And of course, the cliche and the joke is that we wish they were every 140 years for 2 days, but this is our system. So we try to pack in all of the important issues of the state into a 140-day legislative session. And we have about 6 weeks left. And so it's we're well past the halfway mark, but really coming down to crunch time where some big decisions are going to be made about the future of the state. And from my perspective, very importantly, about the energy resources and energy industries of the state and how those serve consumers and provide jobs and responsibly utilize the resources that we have available. We, of course, all suffered through, and as the rabbi said, and I'm in the same neighborhood. We were 56 hours in our home without electricity, and we had to relocate. And we, like almost every Texan, and obviously there were some who suffered much more than others, but every Texan experienced the insecurity that comes with not having reliable energy, and recognizing that the homes that we have are not adequately prepared for this type of weather, and recognizing also that the weather is changing regardless of the political debates about why. The reality is that weather is changing. And so we have to make some major thoughtful decisions about our state going forward, and how to reliably provide electricity, how to reliably deliver natural gas and other fuels to our power plants when they need it. And because our system failed on so many different levels, our grid didn't provide the power. We had, in some cases, power in South Texas, for example, we had wind power that was available, almost enough power for 1 million homes that could not get to the market. And because of constraints on our electric grid, we had power plants that were ready to run but couldn't get gas from their suppliers. We had wind farms that had icing issues. We had a nuclear power plant. 1/4 of our nuclear fleet was down. We have 4 reactors. One of those went down because of icing issues. So our vulnerabilities were exposed, and we're hopeful the legislature still has plenty of time to responsibly address those issues. Unfortunately, and we saw it even before the first set of lights went off in Texas, the anti-renewable energy groups, funded primarily by the dirtiest industries of all, have stepped in and are trying to make changes to the Texas market, not to address our transmission, not to address our fuel issues, not to address the reliability of our power plants, but instead to put additional costs on renewable energy resources. And we're very concerned that not only will that be bad for consumers, make power more expensive for consumers, we know of one set of bills in particular that it will probably bankrupt several renewable energy projects, will financially challenge almost all the others. And that's going to have a ripple effect into our rural communities and schools that have benefited from these projects and from the tax revenue that they bring.
So this is a group that tunes in every week and then likes to get their hands dirty, right? Likes to understand the policy and make those telephone calls to their representatives. So what specifically should we be watching for?
Yeah, I would direct your attention to Senate Bill 1278. It has a companion bill that's House Bill 4466. And then just to make things even more confusing, the same language is contained in an omnibus bill that has some important issues that's in Senate Bill 3. But in short, every electric grid, from the day you add the second generator and the second customer, you need services to balance supply and demand on that grid. And those services are generically known as ancillary services. They help keep the grid in balance. Today, we share those services across all customers. And we've looked at it over the years, and it's been determined that this is the most efficient way to charge for ancillary services, is to share it for all customers, because no one group of generators is responsible for the cost. Long story short, the proposal in the legislature will take all of those services and apply those to renewable energy. The second thing that they try to do is, and I joke that we have very good scientists who work for our industry. We are familiar with the fact that the wind doesn't blow all the time. We know that the sun will not be out at 3 o'clock in the morning. But there are lawmakers who have said, well, if you want to be in Texas, then you're going to need to be available all the time. And you're going to need to be dispatchable. And they're claiming that it's a reliability issue. And so they have added language to these bills that is very dangerous, very unclear. The authors cannot even explain how these bills would work when enacted. But they say that the renewable generators will be responsible for purchasing replacement power to meet net load, meaning we will be required to purchase power in order to deliver it to customers. And that, frankly, is the best that we understand it. It's unclear how generators, we're not legally allowed to speak to one another and coordinate on pricing or coordinate our efforts in the market. So it's clearly designed to add new costs to renewable energy, which means, and the authors are very open about it, while they can't explain how it works, they claim this is going to bring more thermal generation to Texas, which means dirtier. It's going to bankrupt renewable energy and bring the dirtiest power back to life. It's terrible for consumers. We know it will cost more because they tell us it will cost more. They say it will put more money into the market and create more incentive for investment. That means more costs for consumers. We fear that this means higher prices for consumers. It means dirtier air for everyone. It means rural communities that have counted on these projects are not going to get the tax revenue that they were expecting. And it really is quite dangerous. But most importantly, it does nothing to address reliability. It does nothing to address the fact that our grid failed us. It does nothing to address the fact that our fuel supplies failed us. It is a very callous and very discriminatory attack on renewable energy that takes advantage of a tragedy that we all suffered through together to justify a policy agenda that the Koch brothers, this is a Koch Industries bill. There were only two companies registered in support of this, and one of them was Koch Industries. And I think that, I don't think in this case that they have the best interests of Texans at heart.
So thanks for that. So we're going to keep pushing out information on specific bills and our action alerts and our rapid response notifications. And so those are usually, support or vote yes or vote no, and pretty short. But in general, as we're meeting with our representatives or having conversations, if we have a chance in a town hall meeting or something like that, what's the general messaging around these issues that you'd recommend?
I recommend it, and I'll let me look back to something that Rabbi Blumoff said at the very beginning. It is about the double manna that we have. We have the resources that Texas needs. I always say Texas has the power to power Texas. We have natural gas, we have renewable energy, we have wind, we have solar. He mentioned exporting. We have the ability to use renewable energy to, for example, decarbonize our production of natural gas. Asian consumers more and more are saying they want carbon neutral natural gas. If we can keep people working, but we have to reduce our carbon. We have to be serious about emissions reductions. Partnering the double portion that we've been given, the renewables and the traditional fuels. My message for the legislature and the message I recommend to those of you communicating with the legislature is this. We need to continue to encourage all of our energy resources in Texas. We need to leverage them together. That attacks on renewable energy are not what consumers want. They're bad for consumers. They're bad for, and frankly, the tighter your budget is, the worse it is when your electric bill goes up. This is bad for communities, but our rural communities have been neglected. This is bad for rural communities. South Texas is having a tremendous build out of wind and solar. We've already had 2 projects in South Texas canceled because of this proposal. So my message for lawmakers is encourage all of our energy industries, encourage them to work together responsibly to continue growing in tandem and to quit using this crisis to pass an agenda that's anti-clean energy. Focus on solving problems and say no to 1278 and the other bills involved here.
So I was about to let you off the hook there, but do have one more that B wanted me to make sure to ask. So a lot of the conversation about renewables, like a lot of our framing, just probably because, like you said, we all went through a winter storm together. And so I think a lot of the conversation about renewables has been going through the lens of the winter storm. But I think we should also think about equity too, right? So how do attacks on renewables especially hurt the chances that low-income communities will benefit from Texas's clean energy potential?
Yeah, well, especially in rural areas, and in South Texas, if you look at where the investments in clean energy are being made, in many places we're the top taxpayers in the county. So just starting at the investment level, this makes it very difficult to invest in those communities. And there are a lot of places where we go, and I go with developers for their opening. I was in an area near Brownsville a couple of years ago in a project called Magic Valley. It's a wind farm, and it brings a lot of new tax revenue to the school districts. And these are schools that traditionally haven't had the same resources as others around the state. And so at the very top level, it's these are jobs in rural communities. This is tax revenue for rural governments and schools in all corners of the state. At a secondary level is directly to the consumer. That if we continue to, renewable energy is the cheapest energy available. Wind and solar are coming in lower than anything else available right now. And so that when we deliberately, and this is the complaint of these other dirty generators, is renewables are too cheap and we can't make as much money as we would like. Therefore, they want to make us more expensive. That again tells you everything you need to know. But of course, who's going to pay those bills? It's going to be felt on every electric bill, but it's going to be felt more severely by some than others, because when you have less disposable income, you can't afford an increase in your electric bill. This is a very, very substantial increase. This is the most, in the 9 years that I have been here, this is the most outrageous and most expensive attack on clean energy that we have seen. And it will drive up the cost. It will hurt these projects. It will hurt these communities. It'll hurt the landowners, frankly, also who benefit from having these projects on their land. Farmers who struggle with drought, and we saw it just a few years ago. We're going into it again. This extra income makes it possible for them to stay on their land. There are, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, there are some good bills, and one in particular, Representative Drew Darby has House Bill 1607, is a transmission bill that will open up the grid. It will get power moving. It will help our oil and gas industry to get the electricity they need to decarbonize. It will remove the constraints that kept that South Texas wind from serving the million folks who were freezing in their homes. And so we do have some good things to support. I don't like to be all negative, but we could use everyone's help on these ancillary services bills. The message: don't make changes to ancillary services, but improve the grid with House Bill 1607.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions from the audience, if you have just a quick minute. So reminder on Senate Bill 1278, where is it in the process, and who do we need to be talking to right now? And then the second one, the last one from the office or from the audience, what's your counterpoint to renewable energy receives the heaviest subsidies of any energy source?
Two really good questions. First, Senate Bill 1278 was voted out of the Senate. It had an amendment on it that was an attempt to make it a better bill, but it's still a truly awful bill. It has been sent over to the House and was referred today to the House Committee on State Affairs. So I'd encourage, I would say, weigh in with every House member, regardless of where you live. Please let your House member know that you oppose this bill. You oppose this group of bills that change ancillary services. There's information on my website at poweralliance.org. There's an alert on the front page, and so take a look at that if you want more background information. But state affairs members and House members generally, let the Lieutenant Governor know, let the Governor know of your concern. With regard to subsidies, and this is something that we face every session, is this sort of false narrative that renewable energy is subsidized, and then the good people of every other industry are just living in a free market and not getting any tax incentives or encouragement at all. And I would simply refer you, we have on our website some information about subsidies, but everything there, starting at the very top where you raise capital to build projects. There's a something that is not considered a subsidy, but it's called a master limited partnership. Only fossil fuels can use master limited partnerships to go to Wall Street and to raise money. Gives them a huge advantage in getting the cost of capital down. There are depletion allowances and other credits that go to oil and gas directly. But then when we start looking at nuclear, we have subsidized the liability for our nuclear power plants. We subsidize the mining of fuel. We've subsidized coal since even before the United States was a country, with geological surveys and canal building. We didn't want to use British coal, so we subsidized American coal. And it's good. And I don't have a problem, and I should be very, very clear. I do not have any issue with other industries, tax incentives or subsidies. We have liability caps on oil spills and cleanup. We provide cleanup assistance for coal mines and reclamation of coal, of mining sites, coal power plants. We spend a lot of money shifting. We're looking at transportation. We move coal, we move oil all over the country. There are subsidies for transportation. So I don't have an issue with incentives that help make energy abundant and affordable for Americans, and incentives that help us be more competitive to be the energy provider to the world. I want to do that. The only issue I take with any of it is the groups that take stacks of money, turn around and hand it to dark money groups, companies that make billions of dollars, then turn around and hand that money to dark money groups to lobby against clean energy that's cheaper, it's cleaner, and it's made in Texas, and ought to be used. But we're happy to discuss incentives anytime.
Well, really appreciate you taking those questions. I'll give you a chance before we let you go to offer any shameless plugs, and got to ask one more time for a website where we can find more information.
Good. Well, yeah, feel free to follow us on Twitter. I'm easy. It's Jeff Clark Tweets. You can follow me there. Our website is poweralliance.org. And our Twitter account we're on Facebook, of course, and on Twitter, it's A Power Alliance is our handle on Twitter. Would love to hear from anyone who wants more information. And again, just very much appreciate your help in spreading the word about these bills. Important for Texas.
Really appreciate the time today, and keep up the great work. We'll look forward to following you on Twitter and hopefully seeing your face in the Capitol. So thanks for
thanks. Good to see you, and thanks for your help.
Right, thanks again. All right. Next up, we will welcome to the conversation Reverend Danielle Ayers as we continue our special weekly witness segment, Bringing It Home, with Reverend Danielle Ayers, Minister of Justice with Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. She's also a Texas Impact board member. This segment is used to help discuss how you and your congregation can bring home, I use my quotes for those who are listening on podcast, how you can bring home our weekly witness conversation in your congregation and community. We plan on bringing this segment to you about once a month. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Reverend Danielle Ayers.
So good afternoon, Scott, and everyone who's listening today. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to talk about the ways in which congregations, regardless of their size, can really be engaged, hands-on in many of the issues that we care about. And I certainly hope that our faith calls us to live out this faith in public life. And so today I'm super duper excited, not only because we're talking about climate change and renewable energy, but because I have Miss Marsha Jackson, who is one of our local sheroes here in the Dallas area. And I'm going to talk real quickly because I want you to really hear from her, because I think she's such an inspiration. And she really speaks to and really lives out and embodies what it means for congregations and churches and people of faith, really to believe in people power and what it means to really deal with toxic waste in your community. So as many of us know, at Friendship, let me back up. At Friendship West, part of one of our target areas, in addition to many other justice areas, is environmental racism. And so, because we're very clear about where our congregation, where people live, and where we also have our church, that Black communities, in particular, poor communities and people in communities of color, are more susceptible to environmental racism, racist zoning policies. And, globally, we know this extreme weather, right? This extreme weather that creates pattern changes, extreme temperatures, droughts, floods, et cetera. We are most impacted when that happens. Even with this past winter storm, right? What does that mean in areas that have power plants that sends out, toxic waste in the air when those plants are shut down, and then when they have to start back up again? And so for us, we turned Marsha. I forgot how I met Marsha. I think it was her cousin, who's a member of Friendship West, introduced us, and she began to tell me her story about Shingle Mountain. And so, of course, once I heard her story, I couldn't help but to be connected and get engaged and involved. And so as a congregation, how we connected with Marsha was really asking her, what can we do to support you? How can we plug in to what you're doing over in Shingle Mountain here in the southern part of the city? And so for congregations, I think one is just a matter of connecting with people out in community, but it's also then learning more about an issue. So we learned a lot more about environmental racism. We learned a lot more about climate change, renewable energy. So we're just not really getting into this field, but we know injustice when we see it, and we know we want to do all we can to use our resources, then support those out in the community who are fighting against toxic waste being in their community. So I'm going to turn this over to Marsha, because I think as she tells the story and it unfolds, you can see how congregations can be instrumental in assisting those out in the community. And I'll just do this shameless plug. Marsha, eventually, because I think her pastor retired, and then she found her new church home at Friendship West Baptist Church. So she's also now a member of Friendship West as well. So Marsha, I'm going to turn it over to you. So can you tell us briefly a little bit about how Shingle Mountain was made possible, and then how you and other community members rallied to get get a change, and then where we're going, where are we now, and what's next for Southern Sector Rising, and those of us who are partnering with you.
Thank you, Pastor Ayers. Shingle Mountain started January 2018, right next door to my home. And after continuing calling and then finally getting some help, which I didn't get in before, it finally moved next door. So just imagine 150,000 tons of raw shingles next to your home and what kind of effect that has on the community. So we began to rally, and I ended up meeting Tamika Duro. She introduced me to Let Drop It Breathe. And then I met Jim Schoenbeck and then Robert Wolosky. Robert wrote numerous articles on this to bring attention to it, and nobody thought about raw shingles right next door. But even though the raw shingles right next door, no one had thought about the impact on my health. And the environmental injustice is really real here because it has effect. And if I continue talking, you might hear my voice rally. So we continue fighting and then continue bringing the attention about the raw shingles. The company brought it down from McKinney and dump raw shingles, roofing shingles come off your house to look like mountains. And after that, and we finally got approval. They finally removed it. All the shingles moved in February because of our allies' voices. If we didn't have bring the attention, I don't think nobody really would have heard my voice or anybody else. But the shingles were moved. It was moved in February. But however, even though the shingles have been moved, it's still work being done on the site. Still remediation is being done. As of yesterday, they're still digging, and they're having to go so far. Just imagine, raw shingles pollutants are on your property for almost 3 years. So you're going to just imagine we're next to a creek, and that creek also was the pollutants were flowing off into the creek after the city finally first found out about it. So they're still doing it. They're still saying a remediation won't be completed until June, and we're hoping that. But the main focus of everything, because of this, is the zoning. My property is zoned as agricultural, but right next door to me is zoned IRIM. So we need to work on that zoning to protect the family, protect the communities, because our property was here way before this business decided to come in. So just because the property, I believe, is IRIM, you still have community living here. You still have a family. No one buying property in the days, they're going to actually go and say, what kind of zoning that you're in. You know, who does that? But the property is agriculture, and that's what we thought. We never would think that we were going through what we're going through right now. And my whole district, my whole areas has also succumbed to the property of zoning. We've been fighting 3 different batch plants since then, even since Shingle Mountain here. So just imagine what that's going on with our environment here. We deserve to breathe clean air also, just like everybody else does. You know, and for these to continue affecting us here, we even have a super fund that's here in my district that we're still fighting that too. And that's been going on for a while, but we're still trying to bring the attention to the EPA. This needs to be done. This needs to be cleaned up immediately. Not now, not yesterday, but immediately ASAP, not another year or two, because those have pollutants on that property that has cyanide in it. You got family around there. So this is still environmental that needs to be cleaning up, and we need to work together and continue to push these efforts to have these properties cleaned up. So Shingle Mountain's gone. Our neighborhood name is Flora Farms. So just because the Shingle Mountain is gone, that we are stated pushing now for a neighborhood plan, working on what our community name is Flora Farms, to bring that green back into our community. We're working now on a park for our community, for that whole property, if the city take over, to move that property now and to make it a park and continue our name, continue our neighborhood name, Flora Farms, bring the green back into the community. This is an Austin route that just happened last week that the 45 was shut down. So let our neighbors know that when we come through, there's green. That help us to breathe clean air around here. So we're mainly pushing right now the neighborhood plan, and we work so hard on that. And we're working now with allies and the city park and the community. We can't complete our vision yet until the city take over the property, but that's our next vision. Flora Farms, bring it back again, clean air, clean up the environment all over together.
Thank you so much, Marcia. And I'll say this in terms of a congregation, if you're listening and you're trying to figure out how can you be engaged with communities, one of the things that we simply did was just use our resources to be a support to Marcia. We lend our voice, our platform. We would go live on Facebook and have action outside of Shingle Mountain. We did press conferences with Southern Sector Rising and Marcia. So I think it's about just how do you find a way to support, community leaders like Marcia, who are bold enough and brave enough, right, to deal with systems and institutions that is systemic racism, the way in which it's playing out in this environmental justice piece down southern part of Dallas. So it's just about how do you use what you have to go in and to support those out in your community. And that's just really what we did. We didn't have a problem. Our senior pastor, Dr. Freddie Douglas Haynes III, had no problem always showing up, lending his voice, being interviewed by national media. And I believe, Marcia, you want to tell them about what happened with Disrupt and Dismantle?
Oh, yes. We have been reaching out so much, and then they found us, actually reached out to us, and Soledad O'Brien came out and did a documentary on the system racism in the city of Dallas, and Shingle Mountain was also aired, and Joplin area, because these are the areas that are affected so much because of environmental. And like Danielle said, that we started, and I'm sorry, I forgot to say, Southern Sector Rising we organized out of this fight back in April 2019. We organized Southern Sector Rising, and that Southern Sector Rising is supporting districts 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, because those are more of the environmental areas that we need to kind of clean up here. So yes, and all the allies came together and worked together. And that is a great miracle, great voice, because when you have a multitude of voices, then we are reaching out and reaching people. Our pastor, Dr. Patrick Haynes, is just wonderful. And he pointed and tell you just like it is. And of course, Rabbi Nancy was there also. But all these allies working together, that is a force that we need to continue on to kind of keep our environmental clean. And not only did Soledad O'Brien come out, we also had AJ Plus News that reached out national and brought national attention to us. So these areas, people did not realize that right here in Dallas, that we have so many environmental areas, pollution that affecting the family here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll point out is every district that Marcia rallied off is predominantly Black and Brown communities. And so this is why we're saying the problem is systemic, and we have to have a convergence of voices. And that means, and it's also, let me say, Marcia, and say this whole coalition and these allies is the interfaith, right, as well as across racial lines. So this is about people coming together to do the right thing, because as Marcia said, I believe that access to fresh air and clean water is a human right, but we're learning more and more that it's not free. And so as congregations, people of faith, we definitely feel it's our obligation, right, to make sure that we very much so enter into this public square and use what resources we have to bring about a change. So thank you again, Scott, for allowing us this opportunity, allowing Marcia to tell her story once again. I think more and more people need to hear this, because the fight is not over. And as she mentioned, we have so many other toxic waste dumps right here in the southern sector of Dallas. So thank you so much for allowing us to be here once again.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor, for your important work on this. And Marcia, thank you so much for both sharing your story, but also for the work you've done in organizing your community. And I just add in terms of steps that congregations can take, I think Danielle gave a really solid list. But step one is we have to hear those stories, which means that we have to be out in neighborhoods talking to people and figuring out action steps to make sure that we're addressing needs of our local community. So thank you both for sharing your story and for those steps that you've taken. All right, friends, next I would like to welcome to the conversation our very own Advocacy Director, Josh Houston. Josh, welcome to the conversation today.
Hi, thanks, sir. Glad to be back.
Yeah, so I was talking to a lot of, we're both on a lot of calls and talk to a lot of people who are around the Capitol often. And, just watching Twitter and in those conversations, it seemed like this last week or the last couple of weeks for many people has been among the roughest stretches of governing or doing this advocacy work for a lot of our friends. And I can certainly feel that. The last couple of weeks have been rough. How are you feeling and where are we in the legislative session?
Yeah, what week was that when you had the over-under and how many war metaphors that I was going to use?
Yeah. Are you going to top that today?
Well, I mean, I don't know about that, but, several of us who watch this professionally, we bump. It hasn't been like past sessions where you bump into your lobbyist friends in the halls as much, but some of that's still happening as we all get vaccinated. And I bumped into a few of them. And we were using the term blitzkrieg. It felt like a blitzkrieg. They knew that I think that there was a perception that one side was afraid to be in the building, and then that meant they could get more done in committee hearings. And they went early with the controversial stuff to appease their base. And we were referring to that as a blitzkrieg. Those of us that watch it professionally looked at the construction of the House committees and thought, "Ooh, I don't see the firewalls that usually exist in that chamber that are constructed to try to slow up some of the really super partisan red meat." And so, what we saw last week was things that really would never have advanced in past sessions are taking off like a rocket. While millions of us have worried about the pandemic and electricity, and while we're having yet another blip at ERCOT, after having the horrible massive blackouts that killed people over the winter, the legislature, meanwhile, is pandering to the whims of about 1 million Texans that bother to participate in the Republican primary. And there will be another Republican primary about 11 months from now, and that is largely who the legislature is speaking to. They're not worried about a November general election. If you're in the legislature, then you know that they're going to redraw the districts and that they're going to most likely, there's not a lot of wiggle room. They're just going to swap some voters between the parties. And so by and large, you're not too worried about your general election. That means the only election you really care about is the March primary. And right now they're looking at the most active people in those primaries and doing what those fewer than 1 million voters that swing against the business community and the more extreme wings of the party, what they want. And that's what's prevailing. So, you think we're talking about COVID, you think it's a session about electricity in ERCOT, suddenly bills that bully LGBT children are advancing. We're having the public carry of unlicensed firearms move out of the House. And then we're going to be disenfranchising voters in the name of security and with claims that don't exist. And that, let's be real honest about that. That's about statewide seats, right? The legislature is going to gerrymander their districts. This is about holding statewide office for a decade.
So just to remind folks, because catering to 1 million people seems like a pretty big number to many of us, but as a reminder, that's just a fraction of the total state of Texas, right?
Yeah. When I was born, there were 12 million people who lived here, and now there are 30 million people. So the state of Texas has tripled in size just in my lifetime. That's 1/30th of the population that turns out in those primaries.
Yeah. So last week you talked about, or you reminded us that we were entering a very busy 2 to 3 weeks of legislative session where nothing was officially passed, but nothing was dead yet. We're still in that really important period of committee work, right?
Yeah, we are. So that's why last week was so scary. So over on Monday, I guess I should actually go through it chronologically. This is arcane but important. The Texas House has to post notice for committee hearings 5 days in advance, which means the Senate gets a sneak peek of what the House is going to do and has the procedural advantage of being able to move quicker. So the House Public Health Committee posted notice that they were going to hear one of the transphobic bills, House Bill 1399, that they were going to hear it on Wednesday. And so, not to be outdone, I assume the lieutenant governor instructed his committee chair, but the Senate State Affairs Committee posted shortly thereafter for a committee hearing on even more transphobic bills. And they posted it on Friday afternoon for that Monday morning. So this was leading into the beginning of Monday of last week. So you have Senate Bill 1646, which may be the most draconian bill I've ever seen. It would make it a felony for the parents of a child that identifies as transgender to consent to medical care for the purpose of gender transitioning or reassignment. Additionally, the state would then be able to remove the child from those parents and place that child in foster care in the state's custody. That bill got a hearing. Another bill that also got a hearing in both chambers and actually passed out of the House committee on Thursday was House Bill 1399 by Representative Matt Krause, which would prohibit doctors from performing medical care related to gender transitioning or reassignment. So they're not going to take your kid, they're just going to prevent doctors from being able to do it. And despite waiting all day to testify, many of the LGBTQ persons and their families were prevented from testifying when the chair cut off public testimony around midnight. And then later the next day, passed that bill out of committee 6-4. And there was some grousing from Democrats who said we were promised that this kind of stuff wouldn't advance, which is interesting to note about where we're starting to get with, that's anger directed at the Speaker of the House. That when Democrats, before session started, decided to vote for Speaker Phelan, they must have been given this promise. And it seems that the Democrats feel at least that a promise was broken. So I think that is a lot of what's feeding that vibe. And then we're not done with LGBTQ bills yet. While the House was holding that hearing on Wednesday, the Senate decided to move Senate Bill 29. Which was the transphobic bill that would require transgender children to play sports on the teams associated with their biological sex on the child's birth certificate. And that passed the Senate and is over in the House now on a party line vote. And that was just LGBTQ stuff. We had the House decide to move a unlicensed carry bill. So, think about driving a car, right? I remember driver's ed classes saying this is a deadly weapon. If you use it wrong, it can kill people. It's very dangerous. That's why we're going to make you get a license. That's why we're going to have driver tests. That's why we're going to make you carry insurance. That's why we do background checks into your driving record. Well, what this bill does for guns, also a deadly weapon, is eliminates all those requirements, and anybody can pretty much carry a gun. I think other than felons. So this was a quite astounding thing that is now out of the House and over into the Senate. And while on voting rights, HB 6 and SB 7 get the most attention, there are dozens of smaller bills that are making their way through the process. And two of the most egregious, House Bill 1725 by Representative Paul, we've talked about this one. It is now out of committee. And what this bill would do is it would prohibit you from being able to hand deliver your mail-in ballot. So if the county gets it to you late, if the mail service gets it to you late through no fault of your own, you can no longer run it down to the county to make sure that it gets there. which is going to increase the number of mail-in ballots that result in cancellation and being voided out and disenfranchisement. Another bill, House Bill 4331, would criminalize nonprofits if they distribute applications for ballots by mail and have a position on a ballot measure, which we are legally able to do. So yeah, it was a really rough week last week, and you saw it. We saw it on Twitter. It was definitely in the conversations that we were having in the hallways. We were all feeling it. Those of us that work on these issues inside the Capitol.
Well, the one thing that, for me anyway, made it a little bit better of a week was the incredible way that Texans of Faith responded to many of these. I know many of you were making your telephone calls, you were sending emails, you were having meetings, you were engaging friends and other groups. We're going to need that plus some this week because it's another big week. So Josh, help us out. Let's start walking through the action alert for this week. I see that we're headlining this week with the bills that bully LGBTQ kids.
Yeah, and we just chatted about these. So the thing to do is on the Senate side, call the Senate State Affairs Committee. Just tell them not to advance these bills. Just stop. We can't really be removing children from their parents and putting parents in jail as felons for doing what they believe is in the best interest of their children. I mean, talk about big government, right? There are actually bills that try to make it harder to remove your kid for things that conservative Christians do. And meanwhile, there are things that will make it easier for the state to remove your kid for things that mainline Protestant and Jewish parents would do for their kid. They aren't written that way, but let's be real about it. That's what's going on here. This is the imposition of a theocratic agenda, and the hypocrisy of it all is that these bills actually admit that intersex kids happen. And so if we're acknowledging the scientific fact that intersex children happen and that there are more than two biological sexes, then we theologically have one of two possibilities. Either God makes mistakes or God created more than two sexes. And we at Texas Impact strongly assert that God does not make mistakes. Which means if God doesn't make mistakes and there's more than two biological sexes, why couldn't God make more than two genders? And the bottom line is who is the state of Texas to say any of this? They need to stay out of it. Over on the House side, it's called the Calendars Committee. And I think this is going to be a recurring theme we're going to talk about more in the weeks to come. We're at the point in session where we're going to be calling the Calendars Committee. On the House side, that is the committee that sets the floor agendas. So when a bill gets out of committee, there's actually an intermediary step before you get to the House floor, and it's through the Calendars Committee. It's why it's an extremely powerful committee. And we're going to be calling them a lot to try to stop some of these bills and slow up some of these bills in the Calendars Committee. And this is the HB 1399 is going to be one of them. I don't know if it's been officially reported to calendars yet, but we're not going to wait around on that detail. Go ahead and start calling them and tell them to not set House Bill 1399, that it needs to die in calendars. We also have another one coming up this week in House Public Education. So a different committee, the Public Education Committee, they are going to hear the companion bill for Senate Bill 29. And this is extremely scary, right? So this is the transphobic sports bill. It's over in the House. It's got a House companion, and they're having a hearing on it. This is arcane, but important. If that House bill gets out of committee and over to calendars, they can quickly move the Senate bill out of committee and get it in the calendars. And then it's called over and eligible. And you can do a procedural move, which speeds everything up, and they can be done with it quicker. So we really need the House Public Education Committee not to advance these bills. So make sure you call them. There are a couple good bills that support children, and let's talk about those. They are in the House Human Services Committee, so a different committee. They're both bills by Representative James White. House Bill 1664 would reinstate eligibility for health insurance for children in juvenile justice facilities. And House Bill 2286 would waive the driver's license fee for foster children and homeless youth. These are two small but good bills that are important. So we can maybe do a little bit of good in that committee this week. Also, this week is death penalty week. There's usually a death penalty week at some point in the Texas House, and that's going on this week. There are 3 bills that would reduce the use of the death penalty. House Bill 140 would prohibit the death penalty for serious mental illness. House Bill 869 would prohibit the death penalty for people with intellectual disabilities, is the term we use now. And then House Bill 77, Representative Toth, would prohibit the death penalty where the evidence is based solely on one eyewitness. All of these are good limitations that we should have in our law on the use of the death penalty. It's nonpartisan redistricting committee week over in the House Redistricting Committee. There are, technically 2 bills and 3 joint resolutions, so 5 pieces of legislation. A joint resolution usually has an enabling piece of legislation. They work together. These are over in the House Redistricting Committee. What these bills would do is take redistricting out of the hands of the legislature and put it in the hands of a nonpartisan commission that the legislature would have some say over, but it would be constructed in a way to try to draw fairer maps that actually represent Texans and aren't so gerrymandered that we're really arguably reducing one person, one vote. So that these are important bills that are worth talking about, if for no other reason than for a future day. These bills usually happen in states where the state is in a point of transition. And we never know exactly when Texas may be in transition. So you have to always be pushing on these bills so that when the moment comes, we'll be ready to go. Senate bill. So we got a couple other small bills coming up. Scott, you want to go ahead and go into those, or
keep rolling?
Let's finish off the action alert. Okay.
Yeah, let's just keep going. I know the way we've been doing is prioritizing some of the top that are grouped together, but we do have some other important bills. So if you can keep walking through those, that'd be great.
Sure. We're going to want you to oppose Senate Bill 1089 by Representative Buckingham. This is a payday lending bill. We heard the House companion last week on last week's action alert. It was I can't remember the exact number on it, but it was the payday lending bill you were opposing in the Texas House last week. It's the exact same bill over on the Senate side. I got it here in front of me, actually. It's the companion to House Bill 3425, which would allow finance companies regulated under Chapter 342 of the Finance Code to double the cost of a payday loan, of a $2,000 loan in Texas. It's having a hearing in Senate Business and Commerce on Tuesday. We're going to oppose today in committee Senate Bill 1509 by Senator Creighton. It would require access to a photocopier. So this is the Senate, and it's not technically a Senate companion, but it is extremely similar legislation to a bill we heard a couple weeks ago in the House Elections Committee, which would require a photocopier, access to a photocopier in order to vote by mail. So as written, it would make a elderly person, my 98-year-old grandfather, for instance, who cannot drive and hasn't had a license in 20 years and has never owned a computer, it would make him have to go to Kinko's and make a copy of his 25-year-old expired driver's license for both the application to vote by mail and then to do it again on the actual ballot when it arrives. Access to a copier just cannot be a prerequisite for the right to vote. We have a little bit of hope on this one. On the House side, the House author did some really good work and amended it. So when this bill did come out of committee on the House side, but now it would only require the voter to handwrite. So you don't need access to a photocopier. Handwrite your driver's license number, your social security number, or your state ID number, or your social security number on the inside of the carrier envelope so that you can't see that personal identification information. We can live with this based on the number of people who fail to sign their mail-in ballot. It'll probably be about the same amount of people who fail to sign their state ID number, and it is a very low number. So we don't endorse it because some number of people will be disenfranchised. but we can live with it because it is a much, it's various dozens of people in a large county at the most. I would hope the Senate will see fit to make those changes, and we plan on testifying to that here today. A couple small energy efficiency bills that are, no, I shouldn't say small, they're very important to up the goals. Both are receiving hearings this week, the Senate and the House side. So the Senate Bill 249, is in Senate Business and Commerce. The House Bill 4556 is in House State Affairs. They both have hearings on Tuesday. These bills would raise the energy efficiency goals of the electric utilities in Texas. This is important to incentivize the electric utilities to continue to put funding towards their energy efficiency programs. One of the perverse things, and I say perverse in a technical sense, there's a term in public policy called perverse incentives. One of the perverse incentives of electric utilities is that they're paid to sell power. They're not paid to conserve power. And so these goals are super important to eliminate those perverse incentives and incentivize utilities to help consumers not use electricity. Finally, I guess it is finally, I'm looking at the action alert here. We're supporting House Joint Resolution 126 by Representative Vasut. It would fix a poorly designed section of the Texas Constitution. So in theory, in the Texas Constitution, the legislature can override a veto. In reality, the way the legislative calendar works, by the time bills get to the governor, the legislature is out of town and adjourned sine die. So there's really no way for the legislature to come back and override a gubernatorial veto. So in theory, they can do it. In reality, the timelines make it next to impossible. I think the last time it happened was more than 50 years ago, if I recall. I think it was closer to 100 years ago. This is a good check and balance on gubernatorial power to have the legislature able to come back and override a veto.
So there is a lot going on this week, Josh, and I know that Texas Impact will be keeping folks up to date through Ledge TV and through our rapid response team. Are you expecting that we'll have news out midweek this week about other ways that folks can get involved?
Yeah, so one of the things we did different this week that we're going to be doing a little different going forward is we're breaking the action alert up into 2 action alerts. And that's because of where we're at on the legislative calendar with 41, with less than 45 days to go. We are in the home stretch. Things start moving very quickly. We're at the point in session where something gets loose from us in calendars, and then we have 48 hours. So we could do an action alert for you over the weekend for Monday morning, but then the calendars committee meets on Monday afternoon and we have a complete panic on Wednesday or Thursday. We're at that point. So we've got to be flexible enough. And so be expecting to your inbox multiple action alerts, probably 2 per week. And who knows, maybe more based on what happens over the course of a week.
So definitely keep an eye on communication from Texas Impact. If you want to make sure you're receiving all of the notifications of updates, make sure that you join the rapid response team and legislative engagement group to be paired up with other advocates in your district. You can find both of those in the Action Center at texasimpact.org. Click on Action Center. Josh, anything else you want to make sure we hit today?
That'll be it for now. Stay tuned.
All right, friends. So again, if you have questions about anything Texas Impact related, check our social media, check our website, or email me at scott@texasimpact.org. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the work of the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, I'll just say, and we've talked about it on this podcast, we've talked about it at the staff level, we've talked about it with other advocates. The last few weeks have been hard. But we have found hope in advocates like you who are willing to do the hard work of engaging in this process and making your views known to the Texas legislature. Now is the time to keep up that work. Nothing is finally passed yet, and so we have to continue to put pressure on these important priorities. And we need to find friends to join this process and get involved with us so they can see firsthand and participate in the process. This is a long game. Right. We're going to do the work over the course of the next few weeks, but we're going to continue talking about these issues in the weeks and months to come. So let's make sure that we are getting our congregations active and involved today, engage our networks to begin this important journey. So with that, let's get to work.